Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome again. Welcome to Refu Poet. We have just gone live, so I'll wait for at least one person or two to join. But as we do so, I will introduce myself and I will introduce what Refu Poet is and what we are doing here today. So my name is Atieno, and this is Refu Poet. Refu Poet comes from refugee and poetry. So we're basically an art space that uses art to tell refugee stories of trials and triumph. We started our existence in 2018, where we organized our first artistic event on the World Refugee Day. And we celebrated refugees using poetry, music, and dance. And we've been doing so since that time. We did it in 2019, and we're also going to be doing it in 2020. We bring together refugee artists and Kenyan artists to just tell their stories and help us understand what it is that a refugee goes through on a daily basis from an artistic perspective. So we've been carrying out a series of conversations from last week, Tuesday to Friday, and we also had a conversation yesterday, and we've been tackling various topics. And today, on Tuesday, we are talking about peace building and peaceful coexistence. And with me here today, I have experts on various spaces whom I am going to ask to introduce themselves in a few. But I would just like you guys to know that if you have any questions, any comments, anything you would like to say, please post it on our comment section on Facebook and YouTube. We are going to be reading them out loud. There's Hello, Atieno and team, full discussion. So without further ado, I will take a round and just let my John, please welcome, introduce yourself, tell us who.
Thank you, Atieno. Thank you also for the invite. I'm glad to be here and share my experience with the audience. My name is Joanne Nyongesa. I work with REFU-SERIES Kenya. REFU-SERIES is an organization that supports unaccompanied and separated minors of who are refugees and of course also young women. We provide a mirage of support to this kind of vulnerable group. We provide education, psychosocial support, case management, skill development, and we also do a lot of advocacy and research on laws and policies affecting asylum seekers and refugees in Kenya. So our main core work is around refugee children and young women that we support here in Nairobi. And I look forward to also hearing from other experts who are seated on this table what they do and their areas of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. Let me welcome Beatrice. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Atieno and Refu Poet, for having me here today. I'm Beatrice Kizinzovu. I work with the Life and Peace Institute, which is a peace-building organization working in the Horn of Africa. And specifically in Kenya, I serve as the country manager for our programs here. And our work involves influencing dialogue conversations at national and regional levels, as well as policy engagement and knowledge and learning that informs peace-building practice within the region. And I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Beatrice. Welcome, Dr. George. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure whether you are getting me because I have some challenge
Yes, we
with
can
the
get you, Dr.
internet.
George.
And once you confirm you can hear me, I can proceed. Anybody to confirm for me?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, I think I'm losing Dr. George. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can hear him. I think the rest can hear him as well. Okay, let's go to Evans as I try and connect with Dr. George. Evans, please introduce yourself if you can hear me. Hello, Desmond, please help me. I don't know if it's on my side or I can't hear Evans at all.
How are you?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So please just give us introduction of who you are and what you do and what your organization does on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. My name is George Kut. I work as an independent consultant, peace building and conflict transformation. And I handle quite a number of consultancies globally, including the region and Kenya. Right now, I am working with the UNFPA and other UN agencies in the Western Balkans to develop a training manual and train the youth on youth peer education manual. It's called YPeer manual for the Western Balkans. The manual is almost done and we are soon beginning the training on there. Other than that, I am also currently working with the UN Women in Somalia to support the electoral system towards prevention of violent conflicts, especially targeting violence against women. At the same time, I'm also involved in research in the region with IGAD C1 mechanism and trying to look at issues that are affecting conflict early warning that need research and further action in terms of early response. Otherwise, I've been in the region for a long time, over 20 years, working at grassroots level peace building and nationally developing policies for peace building. I have before developed such policies for peace building with the UNICEF Uganda, UNDP Uganda, and UN Women working together to do draft Uganda National Peace Building. For those of you who have been around in Kenya for some time, I'm the one who developed the first draft of the Kenya National Peace Building and Conflict Management Policy. In Tanzania recently, just trying to highlight my work in the region, I have also developed a strategy with a gender perspective to violent extremism prevention in that country, working with the UN Women again and the government, the Anti-Terrorism Center for based in Uganda for the Uganda based in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam for the Tanzania government. I've also done a project document on peace building and national cohesion for the Malawi government with the UNDP, just to highlight a few of some of the work that I've done. Similarly, I've also done conflict prevention with the global dimension and experience learning for the Nepal UNDP. So I'm happy to engage with everyone in today's discussion and even share our experiences and expertise discussing peace building and social cohesion in involving the refugees. Thank you so much for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope I can be heard. If not, please let me know. So I would like to start
Yes, you
off
can be heard.
Thank you. Thank you, Desmond. So I would like to start off this conversation by first just trying to break down what peace building and peaceful coexistence is. I will invite Joanne, if you could please tell us what peace building is and peaceful coexistence is before we even dive into the conversation.
You, Atieno. Yeah, I must say that in peace building, it involves two communities. It is a process of trying to have two communities live together in peace, just as like the word peace building is, so that you bring one community to live and coexist with the other peacefully. And I'll give an example, for instance, of what we have right here in Kenya. We have the host community who are Kenyan citizens and the refugee community. These are foreigners who have come to Kenya and live in a community that is where we have the Kenyan citizens. So just in a natural way, there will be conflict between these two communities. You will see, of course, a competition in terms of resources that we have. So how do we peacefully coexist with these two communities? And therefore, this is a process that is going to help us just build on injustices that have already occurred and try to have the two communities live in peace, share resources that they have already in the community without any problems. And therefore, for me, peace building is a process of bringing two communities to live together peacefully and to coexist in a community as one. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that, Joanne. So earlier we had Evans. Evans left for a while and then has come back. Evans, if you can hear me, would you please introduce yourself before we continue with this conversation?
Can I add something to peace building?
Yes, that is Dr. John. Yes, George. Yes, you can.
Daktari, I think probably at you're having issue, like he can't hear you actually.
Yeah, can you hear?
Daktari, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. I even heard the previous speaker very well. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
okay. If you can actually add to whatever was said earlier.
Yeah. I really want to add to what my sister said about peace building, which is very, very useful. But I also want to add that peace building happens in an environment where people have seen, or communities have seen, the need for peace, and that they understand the kind of peace building that they are talking about. And I like reminding communities that peace building as a term was popularized immediately around the early 90s, immediately after the fall of Berlin Wall, after the world started realizing that conflicts were mainly coming up to be intra-country issues or intra-state issues, and therefore there was no much focus on conflict between one state and another. So
I think we're having internet issues with Dr. George. I think he hung. Yeah. Okay, it's okay. These things happen, guys. Internet is not as, consistent and trustworthy as you might want it to be. So I would please ask our audience to be understanding that these things happen. Sometimes internet just decides to hang, and that happens. But let me bring in Beatrice. Perhaps Beatrice, you can explain. Perhaps you can also give us your perspective on what peace building and peaceful coexistence entails, and perhaps you can tell us why is it important for there to be peaceful coexistence, especially between host communities and refugee communities. Karibu, Beatrice.
Hello. So for me, peace building is a process, and at times a process that takes quite a long time, but it's a process that contributes to a change in attitudes, which is really so important even when we think about the dynamic between refugees and host communities. So it involves a change in attitudes, but also a change in actions within and between community groups. And so it also involves getting to know and appreciate the other person, their beliefs, their cultures, their practices, and their ways of being, and making a conscious effort to understand them and to include them. So for me, peace building is not about tolerance, which is what we often see when it comes to refugee and host communities. It is not about accepting that, okay, they are here, so we will just live with them and they will live on their side and us on our end. It's actually about making an effort to get to know the other, whether it is within the host communities, whether it is between the host communities and the refugees. And so why is it important for refugees then and host communities to coexist? It's important because this is how communities grow and develop jointly. So when you see instances where the host and refugee communities have a good relationship, it means that there is an opportunity for ideas to be shared, but also for the relationship to be symbiotic, because both refugee and host communities have something to offer to each other. And so when they coexist, then it becomes beneficial to every single person that is around them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I want to still ask you a question because you're talking about it's not about tolerance. It's about actually making intentional steps on knowing what the other community is, what do they do, what are their cultures, where do they come from. So in your own terms, how does a successful integration look like, especially for, refugee communities? How can we say that refugees in this particular area are successfully integrated?
I think we can say that when you have opportunities that are the same, when we are not looking at them from the lens of the other, so when they're actually able to compete for opportunities in exactly the same way, when they're able to access educational opportunities, when they're able to actually be themselves. So one of the challenges we normally have is that you expect the refugee to speak your language, to assimilate, to make an effort, but we don't want to make any efforts to actually learn their language, learn their cultures. And so a fully integrated community is one where you are able to see both aspects infused together, such that, for instance, you're able to see, okay, we are in this community together, but we can put on cloth from the other side and think that that is okay and that is normal. So, for instance, if you look at Isili in Nairobi, unless somebody actually tells you I'm a Somali from Somalia, half the time you would expect them to be local. And it's only when you realize that, oh, they're in a meeting and they are unable to understand, that you think, okay, I should have made a better effort. So integration is about accepting them as they are and also infusing them into the system in different ways. When a refugee is able to access a job, access identification, access the same laws and regulations. So when they're able to go to the police station and report and get fair treatment and they don't have to pay a bribe, then that is what integration looks like. That they are treated exactly the same way a member of the host community would be treated. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. I think I also want to direct this question to Joan. But before I do that, I don't know if Evans, you can hear me. Please say something, make a sound, and let me know that you can hear me and you're able to speak. But let me ask Joan. Joan, refugee deals with young children, young women, minors, and women. I would also like to ask that question to you. How does a successful integration look like for these young children and young women or these vulnerable groups coming from refugee communities?
Thank you, Atieno. Yeah, just to echo more on what my sister Beatrice has talked about, successful integration in the community. For young refugee women and girls, for me, it will look like a plain level field for both the citizens and the refugee community. Take, for instance, when you talk about education, are they able to access our schools just the same way as a Kenyan child will go to school? Are they able, to enjoy such rights just as a Kenyan will do? Because look, the laws that we have already in the country, the Kenyan laws, they talk about, when you look at chapter 4 on the Bill of Rights, it talks about all rights being enjoyed by everyone in Kenya. There are only two rights that cannot be enjoyed by a refugee. And here we're talking about the right to vote as well as the right to own land on freehold. But all these other rights that are contained in the Bill of Rights are supposed to be enjoyed by everyone. So our children able to access schools just like any other child? Are they able to go to hospital and treated just like a Kenyan child? Are they able to go to the market, to sell and to buy goods just like any other child in Kenya? And yes, some of these rights have actually been realized because, for instance, when you look at acquisition of documents, a refugee child is able to get a birth certificate as long as that child is born within the Kenyan soil. So that is a step forward, showing that these things are possible and there are rights that can be enjoyed by both communities as long as there's political will with our leaders as well as the community itself. So yeah, the right to access social amenities for both refugee community and the Kenyan community is what we will talk as a successful integration between these two communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Let me bring back Beatrice and ask you, what are some of the challenges that hinder the peaceful coexistence between host communities and refugee communities?
I think Beatrice didn't get your question.
Sorry, I was muted. I wanted to just
Okay.
confirm you were speaking about the challenges, the hindrances between host and
Yes.
refugee communities
Yes.
coexisting. Okay, thank you. So I think one of the main hindrances is attitude, that we look at refugee communities as the enemy. We imagine that they have come to take our opportunities. We imagine that we will not prosper because of them. So let me just give an example. For instance, one of the hindrances is that when something happens within communities where you have hosts and refugees, usually the refugees become the first suspects. So when I undertake work, for instance, in Majengo, Nairobi, and there's an issue about prostitution, everybody says, oh, it's these Tanzanians. When they came in and they settled, they are the ones who do these things. For us, we are, sisi ni wasafi kama pamba. We are clean. We don't do these things. When you think about another informal settlement in Mlango Kubwa, when theft happens, they say, oh, it is these Ugandans who came, and now they are the ones who are spoiling our good name. when you look at the actual individuals engaged in these particular things, it is not the refugees, it is the locals. But then the refugees become the easier target to point at. So one of the hindrances is that they're being blamed for things that they don't do. And so there must be a shift in mindset to look at them as part of the community and not as outsiders. The other hindrance is fear, that we imagine that our resources are not enough to be shared across. And so there's a notion that because these 2 or 3 refugee children have come, they will be able to take my opportunities at the school. Whereas we could look at it in terms of we are better placed because they are here, because then we can also learn from some of the aspects that they bring in from their communities. And the third hindrance for me is systems, that we make it so difficult for refugees to integrate. And so they are double disadvantaged or triple disadvantaged. They are struggling with coming into a country where they don't already belong. They're struggling with the trauma that they brought across, but then they're also struggling with a system that is not built to accommodate them. And so they have to struggle for papers, struggle for entry into school, struggle for entry into work, struggle for business permits. And so for them, it's a continuous struggle. And I think if these 3 aspects really are discussed and admitted on both sides, then a conversation can begin. But as long as these hindrances continue, then really even the starting point for the coexistence itself is difficult. So even before we get to coexistence, there are even challenges to what the structures are that would enable that coexistence in the first place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. And it's really interesting because my next question was that. My next question was, how do we change the attitudes of people that refugees or asylum seekers are here to just take our opportunities? And I think you've touched on it, that there's need to, to change that attitude. There's need to let go of fear that refugees are here to take what rightfully belongs to us, and I put that in quotes. So I can see Dr. George is back, but before I bring in Dr. George, let me just connect this with Joanne. Joanne, you've worked with refugees. You've worked with refugee women and also the young children and the activities that they're involved in. I would be curious to know what is the potential of refugees, both economically, socially, culturally, and even politically, to a country.
Thank you, Atieno. For me, I look at them as a resource. I look at them as a resource to the country and to the community where to live in. One of the challenges that Beatrice has touched on is a lack of awareness of who a refugee is. There needs to be a campaign just to, to sensitize the Kenyan community that these are people with potential. They're here by their own right. Seeking asylum is not a crime, but a right. And when you understand why refugees are in a particular country, that is when you will be able to see what they bring. And they come in with a lot of talent and with a lot of potential. I'll give an example of, let me talk about refugees from the Great Lakes. Refugees from Great Lakes are very good French speakers, and therefore we could tap on that just to have even French teachers in our schools to teach our children French. Look at the kind of music that they do. There was this famous club in town called Simas. It was full of Congolese. See how they do their music. Are we as a country, are we as a community able to tap into what they are able to bring on the table? Look at the great and rich culture that they have. Look at the Burundian and the dance that they showcase. They are very good dancers. Are we able to tap into that potential? Look, for instance, of the Somalis in Isli. They are very good business men and women. Can they provide even employment even to our young our young men and women of the Kenyan citizen. If we are able to bring these examples, there's what we call evidence-based programming. If we are able to bring these examples to the fore and say, look, this is a refugee who has been able to provide employment to such a number of Kenyan young men and women, then people will believe. They say seeing is believing. If we are able to give these examples and even be able to document what they are able to do in our country, then this perception of looking at them as a burden to the country, the stereotypes that we already have in the community will end. So for me is what are they able to bring to the table that the Kenyan community can tap in? Is it about their talent? Is it how their rich culture? Is it how they provide employment and even how they do business and be able to provide employment opportunities to our Kenyan citizens who are young and unemployed? Back to your team.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. So let me bring in Dr. George. Dr. George, there's something you were saying before internet decided to go against you. Perhaps you can finish your thoughts. And also, I would like you to explain to us, because we've already started, talking about the peace building and peaceful coexistence between host and refugee communities. Perhaps there is a conflict between host community and refugee community. What does the peace building process look like? Where does it start and how does it end? Karibu, Dr. George.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the interference with the internet. I'm actually in the rural village trying to look for internet here and there in somewhere in Siaya,
Okay.
where I've been living since they locked me out of Nairobi. Yeah, but the question is, okay, why do conflicts happen between refugees and host communities in the first case? There are issues of perceptions, there are issues of fear, there are a number of issues of threat to socio-economic and cultural experiences in that particular community. You will realize that there is a notion from our different countries that are hosting refugees to put refugees to the extreme end at some corner in the country, which is considered very remote. For the assumption behind this needs to be understood. And while another assumption could be because these people cross the borders from the conflict areas in their communities, and the nearest location in the country they are running into could be those areas far from their cities, like in Kenya, the case of Kakuma. Now, a number of factors influence conflict between refugees and communities. When there's an inflow of refugees into the country, there's a lot of threat in terms of environment, because a number of people are coming to occupy a particular area within a short time, and therefore people will start now looking at the people who are arriving from other countries called refugees to be posing some threat to their socio-economic and other factors that they apply in terms of addressing their lifestyles. So, but the idea of looking at refugees as strangers is also a very important question to look at. Why do people think that refugees are just people who have run from conflict, who did not have any life? When refugees come into a country, they come with a lot of experiences from other countries. I heard the previous speaker talk about they have skills in business, they have skills. There are people like you and I who run away from conflict and therefore going to another country with these skills that can be tapped. I like talking about refugees, looking at some particular examples. There is a conflict between refugees and host communities in a place called Kala in northern Zambia that I was handling. The Rwandese and the Congolese that were in Kala camp somewhere around 2001 were in conflict with the host communities. The reason was that the host communities thought that the refugees were stealing their crops, and therefore the cause of conflict was that These people are thieves. They are stealing our crops, while at the same time, they're also being provided by food rations by the United Nations. So this kind of interaction between communities and refugees offer an opportunity for me in terms of integration, peace building, and social cohesion. Now, the refugees, when they come in due to conflict, they are coming for rescue. They want a place which is peaceful for them to address their lives, while they also come into a community that has not experienced that kind of life and are seeing them as threats. So how do we address these two people to live together? For a long time, refugees have been restricted to the refugee camps. And over the time, because of the impact of that kind of restriction, there have been programs that are also involving the host communities in terms of benefiting from any assistance that are being given to the refugees. Now, in terms of peace building, before we are able to have integration with refugees, then there should be a lot of education and sensitization, including awareness on what conflict is. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning. We need to take the communities through the understanding of conflict, the understanding of peace, and how conflict escalates to the extent that people now experience violence and even run away. So that education alone with the host community is very, very important so that they can understand the plight of refugees and accept them as human beings who are running away from the hostile communities and seeking peace. They are not coming as a threat, but they are coming in, then begins to offer some life experiences that become a threat to our communities that are hosting this community. So for me, the whole essence of awareness creation about the meaning of conflict, how conflict grows, and how it can affect everyone is very, very important in approaching peace building, social cohesion, and integration between hosts and refugees that are coming into a country. Now, I want to offer some level of entry point for addressing peace building and therefore conflict transformation among refugees and the host communities. Human security has provided very, very important lenses for us to for us to mount our peace building in the community. For example, if we want to look at a successful peace building and cohesion between communities hosting and refugees, we need to look, for example, what is the impact on food security in the area that is being occupied by refugees? Are refugees bringing in more food security, or are they taking away the food security of a particular area? And how can issues of food security that can land communities and refugees into conflict being addressed in an outfit of peace building, for example? The other areas are areas like health security. You will realize that in many cases, the communities hosting the refugees have got their own insecurities around health issues. Refugees and then coming to share some of these facilities in the community, or bringing in some health facilities that are not in the community that the community would like to share. Same to education. How do we build peace around this? The other aspect is economic security. Refugees, I've seen, like in Kakuma, refugees have a lot of skill in trade, a lot of skill in business, and some of them have even got bigger capital for business that they are doing in the camp. So how do we address the issues of economic security for refugees, economic security for host country, and how do they share their capital base and their skills in terms of building economic security? Then you look at also in terms of peace building, you look at what are the insecurities that are around the community and personal security. How do the communities that are hosting refugees look at their own community and personal communities as they relate with the refugees? Is there a sense of insecurity that refugees are impacting on the community? And how does your peace building therefore address this? This should go on and on with human rights, human security lenses. You look at now, in addition to what I've said, you look at the political security, the environmental security, and any other sense of social security that goes with the presence of the refugees. For now, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. George. I think you've given us a really comprehensive answer. So I'm really hoping that Evans can hear me at this point and can be able to engage with us in the conversation, because I would like to bring him in, him coming from the Refugee Affairs Secretariat, and he didn't get a chance to introduce himself as well. Maybe you can do that while you're answering this question. So Dr. George has talked about, there's a need to address food security, health security, economic, and even personal security. Perhaps you could mention to us some of the activities RAS are taking to ensure that these insecurities are taken care of, to ensure that there's peaceful coexistence between host communities and refugee communities. Karibu sana, Evans.
Hello, Evans. Did you hear the question? Evans, can you hear me? Oh, he's gone. We have lost him.
Gone. It's okay. I think, Desmond, you can ask the questions that are on the comment section, and please, if you have any questions coming or arising out of the conversation you've already had, please feel free to post them on our comment section. We'll be able to read them out and ask our guests to answer them. Desmond?
So I'm just going to read a few comments that we have like people already sent. One from Mercy Kaleche, she's like, "Hello, Atieno and team. Looking forward to an awesome discussion." There is Mary Liz. She says, "Hello, looking forward to another interactive one." And she has a question. She asks, "Is tolerance a term to use in terms of peaceful coexistence, or is it a ticking time bomb?" Anyone who
Can you repeat the question again?
So I'll repeat. Yes, please. Is tolerance a term to use in terms of peaceful coexistence, or is it a ticking time bomb? Atieno, if you could probably share the question on the screen.
Yeah, the question is on the screen.
Yes. Feel free to answer the question.
I think Beatrice had talked about tolerance, so perhaps you can also just emphasize more on the issue of tolerance.
If I may say something on that, for me, I think tolerance is exactly the term that should not be anywhere near peaceful coexistence. And the reason is because that is exactly what we are doing at the moment. We are tolerating the refugees because we have no choice. And in that way, we are robbing ourselves of discovering the huge potentials that they are able to offer to our communities. And so ideally, this is actually the time we should be running away from and building more towards coexisting, which is very different, because coexisting then is recognizing the other and embracing them in the day-to-day happenings of the community. And so definitely this is what we do, tunawavumilia tu, they are just around, so we are tolerating them. Whereas when it comes to peaceful coexistence, then it is actually the opposite of that, I would say. Thank you.
Yeah, tolerance, in my view, is a stage in peace building, but it is not the ultimate goal for peace building. Tolerance offers an opportunity for people to interact and address their peace issues. And as I said earlier, people really need to understand what kind of peace they are looking for. For example, if you understand peace concept as the absence of war as your ultimate goal for peace, then tolerance might be very, very useful for you, because when there's tolerance, it means there is no war, and therefore there is peace for you. When you're looking at peace as a state of tranquility, where you want to understand peace as a place where no conflict exists, where life is serene, a peace like the peace we know in heaven. You know, in heaven we are told that when you die and inherit the kingdom of God, there will be peace. So nobody has actually gone to heaven and come back to tell us this is how it is. But there's a lot of preaching around peace that promotes peace as a state of tranquility. Well, if that is the kind of peace you are looking for, then tolerance becomes an excuse for achieving that long-term peace that you are looking for. However, if you are looking at peace as a continuous process of conflict transformation, that means that the word conflict is not banished amidst us. That means that everything we do it while aware that conflict exists and stay with us forever, and that what we need is just to transform conflict, and therefore the process of conflict transformation becomes the definition of peace. Then tolerance then becomes a stage in moving towards the sustainable peace that we are looking for through conflict transformation. So why am I saying this? It's because you can tolerate someone, like host community can tolerate refugees, but that is not the end peace that we are looking for. They can tolerate one another so that some issues of peace building, some education issues around peace, understanding of it, and conflict transformation can go on, so that we eradicate tolerance in the final journey of peace and sustainable, peaceful coexistence in our communities. So yes, tolerance is not the ultimate aim of sustainable just peace, and yes, tolerance can offer an opportunity for peace building at the beginning, so that we eradicate it while we achieve the kind of sustainable peace and just peace that we are looking for. Thank you.
Oh, and before probably I go to the next question, hi Evans, are you there? Can you hear me? Evans, could you check probably your sound? I think you're on mute or something. I think we're not able to reach him so far. So probably I'll just ask another question to the panelists. This is like anyone can feel free to answer the question. It's from Mordecai Robbins, and he's like, what ideas are there to address politically motivated or sponsored conflict that is counterproductive to a coexistence in refugee hosting areas and countries? So please pull it on the screen so that people can just be able to be clear with it. So yeah, I'll read that again. What ideas are there to address politically motivated or sponsored conflict that is counterproductive to coexistence in refugee hosting areas and countries? Beatrice, you want to give that a go?
Yes, I can. For me, I think one of the ways is to actually highlight the advantages and the positive sides of having refugees within our communities. Because one of the reasons why politicians use this strategy is the same way that it is very attractive in terms of using ethnicity as well. It's that it is a dividing point, and that then they use it to gain political mileage. And so by telling people that, having refugees here is not good for you, they are taking your opportunities, works politically. But I think by exposing to the communities the opposite side of it, the advantages of having the refugees, then the mindsets will shift and people will be able to see that it is actually not true. The other is that to be able to also provide these spaces, not only to be able to provide these spaces for host communities and refugee communities to better be able to engage and understand each other, so that way people are able to make their own decisions out of the influences of the political class. And a final aspect for me is to be able to engage with the politicians in these conversations. So most of the time, the conversations are happening amongst ourselves at the community and host level, but then this politician comes and in a 1-hour speech is able to take away all the peace building work that has been put in place. And so by engaging the political class, then we are also able to change their ideas and to engage them to say, this is actually good for you and for your community. And I think that is where the gap is, where the politicians strive on negativity, and we need to bring them to strive on the positivities when it comes to refugee and host communities by highlighting the advantages. And just to give an example, for instance, if we think about Isli, before the entry point of refugees, Isli was not a regional business hub. And now we proudly talk of it as the regional business hub in East Africa. But then without the refugees, this may not have been possible. And so we should be able to highlight the positives and see how are we taking advantage of that for the betterment of our communities. Thank you.
Yeah, the other idea is also to make communities, particularly youth members of a community, where there's there's hosting of refugees, to understand is and understand who they are also as youth, what their aims in life are. So one idea would be to work with young people to reduce their dependencies on politicians. That I like sharing with the youth is that politicians as leaders are a bit different from transformational leaders. And it is transformational leaders that build peace, because they look at peace as a generational issue, that we are today putting a foundation for peace that the next generation should enjoy, so that the transformational leader becomes a leader who is concerned about the next generation. But politicians are leaders who are concerned about the next general election. So that the difference between a politician and a leader is that while a politician plans with the next general election, the leader plans with the next generation. So if we understand this in politics, if we understand this in peace building, then working with the young people, we will try to involve them in programs that help them as youth look at the next generation in which they are a factor in building, and therefore provide them with the systems, with assistance, with capital, with education that then helps them not to depend so much on politicians, but depend on themselves and depend on their interaction with the refugees as something that is going beyond just the conflict that happened across the countries where each made the refugees to come to where they are now, or the next general election as politicians focus. So which are these programs? These programs should be embedded in policies in a country, and I'm sure there are so many policies that are already supporting building a next generation now, but they are not being implemented.
Okay. Before I bring in Achiro for the
So
next
peace builders
segment.
should know that the youth build on policies that have not been implemented, and therefore move towards addressing their own support systems that makes them less dependent on politicians. If we don't do that, then come the next general election, politicians come with handouts and mobilize the youth with very, very cheap promises on maybe chasing the refugees, maybe so that they can leave behind their businesses for the youth to take, and all this. But a serious youth who is supported, who is educated, well about the future would not be a victim of such politically instigated violent conflicts. My take.
Atieno, before you join in, first of all, Evans, can you hear us now? Could you, I think your microphone is on mute. Could you please unmute it? Evans, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. I think your microphone is on mute. Oh.
Yeah, I think we can just proceed.
I've lost all of you. Is there anybody speaking?
Evans
Yes, we
seems
can
to...
hear you. Yes, we can hear you, Dr. So the last question that I wanted to ask is from a lady called Murimi, and it's directed to Joanne. So Joanne, I know you have been doing like really amazing things with REFU-SERIES, and as we had the conversation before with the fashion event that is coming up. Of course, there are a few. According to now, we're coming back to Murimi's question, there are a few stereotypes that people have when towards refugees. So the question is, I want to ask Joanne to tell us examples of stereotypes local have towards refugees and how we can how they can be corrected.
Thank you, Desmond. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, we've had a lot of stereotypes in the community, of course, coming out of the Kenyan community when they live together with the refugee community. And I'll just give a few examples. We have, for instance, the Somali refugees being labeled as terrorists. We've had this blanket condemnation of Somali refugees that they are terrorists. You remember there were a number of attacks that happened in 2014 in Eastleigh as well as in Mombasa. And every time a Kenyan will be, walking alongside a Somali, then they refer to them as terrorists. There is also another perceived stereotype of refugees that we have. For instance, Somalis and South Sudanese are labeled as rich. We've had stories that, for instance, if you're living in a flat where there are South Sudanese and Somalis, they do not bargain on rent. So when the rent is hiked, they don't bargain, they just pay. So you know that this will has brought a lot of conflict between the host community and the refugees, because they say these people are rich. They are coming from a country where they have a lot of resources, and therefore they have come here to spoil for us. That is the term that they use, to spoil for us. We also have this notion that, for instance, refugees are being helped by the Kenyan government, and therefore they are freeloaders. They get free services from the Kenyan government, and therefore, because of the limited opportunities and resources that we have, they have come here to spoil for us, and therefore they are perceived as a burden to our government, which is not true. Because no single refugee gets anything free from the government of Kenya, not even from UNHCR. For instance, the urban policy for refugees states that if you want to live in the urban center, that is Nairobi and other urban town, you're supposed to be economically stable to sustain yourself in Nairobi. If not, then you have an option of going to the camp, which is Kakuma and Dadaab, where you will get free services. So there's usually this notion that they get free services from UNHCR and the government, and therefore they are here to spoil for us. And there's also this notion that
Hello, Joanne. We've lost you.
The only thing we can do for us to
Tiano.
Yeah, I think we lost Joanne right there, but that's okay. We can come back to her when she's back, so that's fine. So I think we've had a great discussion so far, and we are almost reaching the end of this discussion. But I would like to let me bring in Beatrice and. With your organization, you guys deal with dialogue as a common ground to resolve conflict. So I would like to ask, how do we strengthen dialogue between host communities and refugees as a ground of resolving conflicts?
Thank you, Atieno. One of the ways to strengthen dialogues is to program differently. And I'll give an example. In 2015, working in Eastleigh, we were conducting dialogues. And initially, the dialogues were in English, Kiswahili, and Sheng. And we noticed that some women would always come to the dialogues, would not say a single word, and would always have their faces fully covered. And then we started having side conversations with them to find out what exactly was happening. And we discovered that they came to the dialogues because they had been asked to come, but they did not understand the language at all. And so we created dialogue conversations where they could speak in Somali only, and other conversations where the Oromos could speak in Oromo only. And then at some stage, we would bring it together. And so this was important because they had their own space to speak their own issues, space that they felt was safe. The other way is to create spaces where people can celebrate their individual cultures. And so in between the dialogues, using approaches that will enable these things to be brought to the fore. So for instance, using tactics like drama or poetry or dance or song. These are tactics that traverse cultures. And so they're very critical when you're looking at dialogues between host communities and refugees communities that have diverse backgrounds, because then in this ways they're able to understand each other beyond the barriers of language. And the other one is enabling them to mingle through activities that are diverse, in that in the dialogues you enable them to form the agenda so that they are setting the pace and saying, this is what we want to discuss because this is about this and the other. Because then you discover the different dynamics that they face that perhaps host community members do not face. So for instance, also when working in Eastleigh is when we discovered the aspect of budgeting, where the Somali refugees would tell us, we are ATMs for the police. We budget, monthly budget, in addition to whatever else you put, whether it is your spaghetti, your milk, next to it, you also put budget for the policeman because it is, part of the occurrence, so that if one of you gets arrested, you're able to contribute. And so it needs a shift where you're saying we are programming differently because we are taking their concerns. And so the dialogues then must be safe spaces, but also alternative spaces that break the barriers between host communities, but that also recognize the trauma that the refugee communities are carrying along with them, that might not always allow them to engage at the same level, and so also creating safe spaces for them to be able to do that as a community. And the last thing for me is also recognizing that refugees are not they're not homogeneous. So also recognizing the heterogeneity of refugee communities. So one of the things we tend to do is to lump them together. Oh, they are all refugees. But in between, they are individuals with different backgrounds, different cultures. They may come from the same country, but just like us, with our plus 40 communities, they also have the same dynamics. So being cognizant as well and not saying, oh, this is the refugee dialogue group, so they can engage there, but going deeper to understand them better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beatrice. And I think I want to just add something on what Beatrice was said on creating safe spaces for refugees to express themselves and for them to just showcase their culture and all. It's part of what REFU-Poet does, and that's why on the World Refugee Day this Saturday, we are going to be, celebrating refugees using poetry, music, and art, just listening to, their perspectives and listening to where they're coming from. So I would encourage anyone who would like to be part of this kind of movement to tune in on right here on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram at REFU-Poet, because we're going to be having some of refugee artists just tell us their story. So I hope Dr. George can hear us, because I have a question that I would direct to you. It's from Millicent Olo, and she asks, when looking at refugee host community relations in the absence of conflict, what is the place of dialogue in ensuring sustainable peace?
Yeah, I think
Okay, throw this question to Joan. Are you able to answer?
just a bit of response to that. In the absence of conflict, what is the place of dialogue in ensuring sustainable peace? I think I refer back to the definition of peace, where peace means a continuous transformation of conflicts. There is no situation where we can have absence of conflict. We can only have absence of violent conflict. But conflict cannot be eradicated. Conflict still exists, even if the notion we see is peace. So dialogue then becomes very, very important to transform any conflicts before they become violent, so that we put in our refugee host community relations a system in which we continuously analyze our conflicts, analyze the way we relate, do our intercultural dialogue to understand each other's perceptions about the other, or perceptions about life generally, how people do their things, how they resolve their conflicts indigenously, and then engage all those experiences in a continuous dialogue towards a sustainable peace. So there is no particular instance where we will say, now we stop dialogue because there is no conflict, there is no peace. This dialogue is part and parcel of providing us with the chances for negotiating our daily conflicts and negotiating our daily peace and interacting in a more peaceful way. So dialogue therefore needs to be continuous in terms of attaining sustainable peace. What we should therefore look for are the different topics for dialogue in each of our interactions. So we are dialoguing. What are we dialoguing about? What do we need to address through dialogue? How do we improve our skills in dialogue, our skills in communication, and therefore continuously negotiate our peace for sustainable peace and development? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. George. So I think we can start the process of concluding this session that we have had. Thank you to all of you guys who've been following from the beginning till now. And I would like to maybe just take a round with our panelists and maybe just get to know what their parting shots these particular topics are. So let me go to Beatrice. What's your parting shot, your last words before we finish?
Thank you, Atieno, and thank you to all those who have joined in on the conversations, fellow panelists and the others. For me, I think what excites me is that the conversation is actually happening. And I think that this is a critical starting point in terms of how we can then further it to influence how refugees and host communities engage better. And just to challenge us all to think about it, because we may be thinking about, oh, the refugee is all the way up in Kakuma or in Dadaab, but then to challenge us to think about how many refugees do I actually engage with within the city of Nairobi or wherever it is that I am? Do I actually know who the refugees are? Have I had a conversation with them? Because I think this is the starting point, to be able to reach out to those who are within our midst. And they could be, we might be imagining, oh, they are very far off. But of course, not necessarily. I mean, I know a tailor who is from Burundi. I know somebody who cooks who is from Uganda. And so we may not realize that they're in our midst, but when we actually have a conversation with them, we'll realize they're much closer. But to also recognize and celebrate and acknowledge their beauty. So I'm sure, for instance, one of the most famous musicians within the Kenyan space is Kidum. Kidum came to Kenya as a refugee from Burundi. But then when people go to his concerts, they enjoy them very much, and some even claim them as Kenyan. But ideally, that is the culture we want to celebrate, that when he sings in his language, we are all there dancing to it and singing along and appreciating it. So then why shouldn't we appreciate their business acumen, the insights that they bring into our communities? And so for me today, really, it is to challenge us all to do better and be better in our approach towards dealing with the refugees within our own spaces. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. We really appreciate you and your insights. Thank you. Joan, welcome. Your parting shots.
Awareness, more and more awareness of refugee existence in Kenya. When I look back at when the Refugee Act was enacted in 2006, there was a lot of awareness creation and capacity building of the judiciary around refugee protection and laws and policies regarding refugees. Judges and magistrates are being capacity built on laws touching on refugee protection. So what about common mwananchi down there in Kasarani? What do they really know about refugees that we have currently in the country? Because the question of refugees' existence in Kenya stretches back to the 1960s and 70s, but up to now, can a common mwananchi really describe who a refugee is? And I want to challenge all of us, those who are here watching, can you for a minute just live a life of a refugee and just feels, how does it feel to live a life of a refugee? Yeah, and I call upon to support their efforts, support their talent. We have very beautiful girls in refugee making very beautiful scarves, and I call upon you that you even visit our website just to see what kind of work they do. They're very beautiful scarves, and I encourage you to go there and look at what they're doing and supporting them. Even as we look forward to the upcoming World Refugee commemoration on Saturday, I also call upon you that join us and see the amazing things that these young people are able to do for us, for our country, and even just for themselves. They're not a burden. They're just people like you and me trying to live a life. They've been uprooted from their own country, and therefore they've come here just for second chances. And we are always encouraged to give people second chances. So let us accommodate them. Let us try and just see what kind of people they are and support their initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. I think we're going to post your website right after this stream is over so that people can visit REFU-SERIES and upcoming fashion competition that's coming up for the refugees, and they can be able to support in any way. Bring in Dr. George for your parting shot.
Thank you so much. It has been very, very useful discussing about refugees and relationship with host communities. It reminds me that if we don't address our own peace in a sustainable way, then very soon, those of us who are discussing about refugees could be the refugees that are being discussed about in another country. So it is very, very important that we understand our conflicts, we understand violence, we understand peace, and then work towards a sustainable peace, making use of every bit of resources. Refugees come in with a lot of lessons, a lot of resources, a lot of interculturality that we should learn from as a country. Whether they are in urban centers, whether they are in rural communities, it is very, very important for us to have an open mind that helps us learn from the other, whether refugees or local people. Uh, Despite the definition of refugee, I think if we were to consider how many people have run away from their homes in conflict, then there are many, many Kenyans, for example, that are living as internally displaced people who are in the same situation as refugees, except that now refugees have crossed the border. So I would like us to extend our discussions also to the internally displaced people who are refugees in their own country, and then look at how then do we learn skills for integration. Uh, Kenya needs to learn a lot of relationship between refugees from our very, very neighbor here called Uganda. In Uganda, there's very, very good integration between refugees and the host communities. And with this, I also offer challenge to organizations, including UNHCR, on how they address the issues of refugees, whether in urban or in rural areas, in a way that communities don't see themselves as isolated, in a way that integrates the two people with different experiences very well, whether refugee or host community. So that if we have resources, then before sharing out resources, we look at what is the situation on the ground where they are being hosted, so that the programs that are used to address livelihood also benefit the local people. Otherwise, if we don't do that, then we give politicians a lot of opportunity to use the situation on the ground to incite youth against refugees to their own political interests. I wish you all a good day during Refugee Day. And with that, I say thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. George, for all your insights. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Desmond, for being here and helping me out throughout this session. Thank you to all of you who are at home and you tuned in and you watched and you asked your questions, you commented, or you liked and shared this stream. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your spirit. We could not be doing this without you. Thank you for sticking with us through the internet highs and lows. And I would like to encourage you that for the rest of the week, we still have conversations. We still have conversations tomorrow. We'll be talking about refugees and education at 11 a.m. So I would encourage you all to still tune in as we delve into this conversation. I would also like to continue reminding you that on Saturday at 6 p.m. on our social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, we're going to have a celebration of Refugee Day using poetry, music, and dance. So please tune in. I can see Millicent Oloy right here has said that very insightful conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Millicent, for always tuning in throughout all these conversations. So I would like to end this live video right here and say thank you, thank you, thank you.